this time around, hey, we're getting ready for a playoff game, and I'm getting excited about it. And we started to talk ourselves into it a little bit on Monday.
We did.
Well, I don't know that this is mission impossible here.
Okay.
I look at this Bills team, and I know they have the best player in the league. But outside of that, they got 13 guys that have caught a touchdown. That's impressive. But it also means there's not one guy that you just are scared to death of.
There's no Jamar Chase. There's no T. Higgins.
And, yeah, they were threw for 30 touchdowns and ran for 30 touchdowns. But 12 of those were their quarterback. So, again, it's kind of a one-man band. And he's a great one-man band.
Yep.
He's the best in the business. But if this Broncos defense, it's top 10 in almost every category, can find a way to slow him down, they got to, as I heard Josh Dover and Cecil Lammey talking about today a lot, they got a puncher's chance.
Yeah, and they don't have a pass rusher on the other side of the ball that guy's got 15 and a half sacks. How are we going to double team him, right?
Right.
Their leading sack getter is 8.
Well, and you contrast that with the Broncos, who have a couple of guys that can get after you.
Yep.
They're the best pass rushing team in the league. So, yeah, you're going against a great quarterback. But there's a couple of ways you can combat that. The number one way is have a great pass rush, right? Listen, I'm not comparing this team to Super Bowl 50 at all. But in Super Bowl 50, they went up against Cam Newton, who was the league MVP. They held the Panthers to 10 points. Why? Because they harassed him all day long. Primarily Von Miller, but then, everybody else along that defensive line and on the edge was getting after him. That's the formula. You got to pressure Josh Allen, maybe force a few mistakes, and, get the ball rolling down the right side of the hill. We'll see, but they have some things in their favor that, like I say, gives them that puncher's chance.
Well, and that's what they did that whole playoff run. They beat up Ben Roethlisberger, they beat up Tom Brady, and they beat up Cam Newton. The NFL today tweeted a video of relive all the Broncos touchdowns in the playoffs on their way to Super Bowl 50. It was a 1:30 long video. And you still hoisted Lombardi.
Yeah.
I'll quiz you real fast since I know you love trivia. I know Zach By's driving home. He loves trivia. How many touchdowns did they score in that playoff run?
Oh, boy. Okay. Well,
Played 3 games.
They scored 2 in the Super Bowl, right? One was Malik. One was CJ.
Correct. Malik Jackson, CJ Anderson.
I know they got to 24, but they had a 2-point conversion late, so there was a couple field goals in there.
McManus did not miss a kick that entire playoff run.
Benny Fowler with the 2-point conversion?
Correct. The last pass Peyton Manning ever threw.
But I'm sure they're not counting that, even though it got into the end zone. So we're just going Malik and CJ.
We're just going touchdowns. You're right. 2 against Carolina.
AFC title game, I want to say, was like 20-18, I think. So that's 2. Was it oh gosh, it was the tight end. Was it Owen Daniels on both of them?
You're right. You're 4 for 4 thus far. Owen Daniels had both. They scored 2 against the Patriots, 2 against the Panthers. How many did they score against the Steelers, James?
I think
to win the grand prize.
I think they had. I think that was a 23-16 game, maybe. So I'm going to go 2. So I think they scored 6 touchdowns total.
Nope. Only scored 1 against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Really? What was the final of that game?
I'll have to look, but I remember they should have had like the scoop and score on Big Ben, and the refs blew it early, and they kicked 1 more field goal. But the touchdown in that game was C.J. Anderson.
They scored 1 touchdown in that game?
So only 3 guys scored touchdowns the entire playoff run. 2 from C.J. Anderson, 2 from Owen Daniels, 1 from Malik Jackson.
And maybe I'm mixing up playoff games against the Steelers, because I mean today's the anniversary of the Tebow game, and that game was 29-23, so maybe that's where the 23 got in my head. But I remember there was the late fumble that DeMarcus Ware forced on the running back that kind of stopped their either game tying or game winning drive for the Steelers.
I believe that was Fitzgerald Toussaint.
Yeah,
he swiped that ball from.
Wow, there's a bit of trivia. So
Brandon McManus had 4 field goals that day. So that's 12 points.
So it was 19? They scored 19 points?
Brandon McManus had 5 field goals that day. I will correct myself.
Okay.
So you had it right on 23.
Okay.
But it was 5 field goals, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion.
All right.
And the late, great Demaryius Thomas caught the 2 from Peyton Manning on the screen pass.
Yeah. Was it 23-16?
It was.
So I had the score right. I just hurried and assumed that was.
I know, but as we take this walk down memory lane, that's a trivia question. Name the 3 guys and only 3 guys that scored touchdowns in the Broncos playoff run on the way to Super Bowl 50. A running back, a lesser-known tight end, and about the 11th famous player on the most historic defense the Broncos have ever had.
Wow. On a team with Peyton Manning, it was a tight end scored twice, a running back scored twice, and a defensive tackle scored.
And again, it wasn't like an Akeem pick six or a DeMarcus scoop and score or a Chris Harris Jr. We all loved Malik Jackson, but again, there's a reason he was like the one of the least famous guys on that defense.
Well, and it's pretty remarkable, too, because that is not an easy path to the Super Bowl. They beat the Steelers. They beat the Tom Brady-led Patriots.
Yeah, you go Big Ben, Brady, Cam.
And then MVP Cam.
Mm-hmm.
And they won the Super Bowl scoring 4 offensive touchdowns in 3 games.
Yeah.
That's the definition of a great defense right there.
It really is. And
Holy
it kind
moly.
of comes full circle back to today of what you're saying. You're not comparing this defense to Super Bowl 50, but I do think, and we'll hear from Andrew Mason at 7:15. He was in the locker room today. Saw a lot of reports that, hey, the locker room's ultra confident. We'll hear from Courtland Sutton in a bit. He even went up there and, to your point, said, talk to some friends around the league today, and guess what they were doing? They were putting their stuff in garbage bags. That's what Courtland's had to do every year of his career this week of the season. Now, he could be putting his stuff in a garbage bag on Monday. He could also be preparing for the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll have to see how it shakes out. But it's just nice that Broncos country once again has a playoff routine as opposed to, like you said, a postmortem routine.
Well, and I think the formula for this game is a little bit like when they were heading into Cincinnati. And I know that game ended 30-24. But it was 17-17 with 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter.
7-3 at half.
The Broncos forced a turnover, gave their offense the ball essentially at midfield in a tie game, right? In the teens against Joe Burrow in that offense. They're going to have to do something similar. If this turns into a track meet, and this isn't a knock on Bo Nix, it's not a knock on Sean Payton, I just don't think this team is built to go into Buffalo in a playoff game and win 31-28. I don't. I think they could win.
The Bills have lost a shootout this year, though.
They have.
They lost 44-42 to the Rams. And then they have 4 losses.
I believe that's the only game they didn't force a turnover.
That's crazy. They have 4 losses, but they really only have 3 because they didn't try in Week 18 against New England. But their losses to the Rams, the Texans, on a day Josh Allen went like 9 for 30. Like one of the most bizarre stat lines you'll ever see from Josh Allen. And they got blown out by the Baltimore Ravens, same as the Denver Broncos did. Those are the 3 meaningful losses for Buffalo this year.
Yeah, so the Texans game, I mean, I don't think you're going to hold Josh Allen to that kind of day.
No, completing 30% of his passes is unrealistic.
I mean, that is the outlier there. That's the aberration. But it does show that there are opportunities, or it's not impossible to slow them down a little bit. And I think that's the kind of game the Broncos are going to have to go in there and win. They're going to have to rely on their defense. That's been the strength of this team. I know they struggled in December, but that's been the strength of this team by and large for the entire season. It's why they're 10-7. It's why they improved from 8-9 to 10-7 as their defense went from bottom 5 in almost every category to top 10 in every category. Thus the 2-game swing. So I think that's what's going to have to keep them in it. And then in much like in every other game that they won this year, it's defense keeps you in it, and then Bo makes a couple of big plays here or there.
Yeah. A bomb to Marvin Mims would be nice.
Right.
I mean, exactly. A bomb to anyone would be nice, but it feels like Mims is sort of the one we've grown accustomed to. I'm not banking on the Troy Franklin-Bo Nix connection finally working out in the playoffs. Courtland Sutton's going to get a lot of attention. Mims has 4 touchdowns the last 2 games. He's the most logical candidate.
Well, and then you look, I think it was either the Cleveland game or the Indy game where Mims had the long punt return, set him up on a short field. They got a turnover, set him up on a short field. Maybe and I think the defense scored in the Indy game as well. So it was that game. It was Indy where the defense gave them 2 short fields and they got touchdowns. Benito had I guess it technically was a fumble return, but the pick 6 on the trick play. It's that kind of thing. Like, give them a short field. If this turns into a battle of which team can go 80 yards the most times, Buffalo's going to win.
Yeah, I would agree. And I bet that Houston game is on loop right now at Broncos Park.
You would think so.
I mean, I'm looking at his stats, James. He was 9 of 30. I did have that right. 131 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. So it's not like he was turning the ball over. He just somehow had 21 incompletions on 30 attempps.
Well, I was going to ask where the game was, but they're undefeated at home.
It was down in Houston.
Why do I not remember that game at all?
It was week 5. Houston improved to 4-1. Bills dropped to 3-2. Talk about 2 teams that went in opposite directions after that football game. Keon Coleman had 1 catch. Kincaid had 2. Matt Collins had 2. James Cook had 2. Ray Davis had 1. That was it. So that was the day the Broncos played the Raiders, and Pat Surtain had his pick six.
Okay. Yeah, that one, and maybe it was on at the same time as the Broncos, and therefore I wasn't red zoning it, and just I have no recollection of that game at all. None.
Well, that's the game the Broncos are studying pretty hard. And remember, they got blown out by the Ravens, like I had mentioned as well, 35-10. So Denver can sort of relate on that level of like, hey, we went into Baltimore and lost by a very similar score that the Bills did. They had this dud against Houston on the road. And then the Rams game, 44-42. You do wonder, though, if you're Sean Payton, are you preaching turnovers, short fields, all that kind of stuff? Or is that almost too much pressure on your team that all of a sudden if they don't get those things through 2.5, 3 quarters, they're going, well, we got no shot?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to put a mode of desperation into them, right? Where it's like, hey, we're going to have some fluky things to go our way.
Right.
It's not a, hey, we can just line up and beat them straight up. I don't think you want to plant that seed by any means. I think you just want to talk about the games they lost, right? Like, hey, here's when they went down to Houston and their offense sputtered, so they can be shut down. Here's where they went to L.A., and their defense couldn't stop the Rams. Rams got some talent, but we think we can keep up with them. So obviously their defense gives up some points, and then they got blown out by the Ravens too. They're human just like we are.
And they also gave up 42 to Detroit. So that back-to-back weeks against the Rams, they gave up 44. The Lions, they gave up 42. Their defense gave up 86 points in a 2-week span, which that's sort of why I didn't give you a ton of pushback, but I do think Denver could win this game 31-28. I think they've proven they have the firepower to put up a number where the first digit is a 3.
All of those games, though, the games where they either struggled offensively or struggled defensively, were all on the road. They were flawless
at Orchard Park. Other than that Patriots game that some of us were in Blackhawk for, when they won by 3 points.
True.
And then Josh Allen said after the game, we didn't want to show anything. It's like, wow, I wish you had told me that on Friday, Josh.
Didn't want to show anything because they were playing them again in 2 weeks in a game that didn't matter?
I think it was more of they were resigned to the 2 seed at that point, and they were. I mean, remember they finished with the Patriots, Jets, Patriots. That's another potential advantage for the Broncos.
They haven't played a tough game.
They haven't played a tough game since at Detroit. So it's not 25 days off that Andy Reid is giving his team, but it's also not like they've been tested since well before Christmas. I mean, we're talking the middle of December.
Well, not only tested, but also played with any pressure at all.
Right, because once KC beat Pittsburgh, they knew Baltimore couldn't catch them for the 2, and they knew they couldn't catch the Chiefs for the 1.
Yeah.
They've been locked into this seed for quite some time.
And playing a game that if you lose, it matters, even if it's not a lose and go home type of situation. Just, hey, this matters for seeding, it matters for the division, it matters for something. They haven't played a game like that in a month. That is a different deal. All of a sudden, when you walk out there for a playoff game, and it's why having a good start is important for the Broncos, because all of a sudden it'll be, we haven't been in this situation, and maybe the pressure mounts a little bit. It's also I don't even know that this is disputable. The Broncos are playing on house money.
Totally.
I mean, I'll be upset, and I think people will be disappointed, but I'll be upset if they lose 47-17. I'll be asking some questions because I've been making the Mac Jones Patriots comparison for a while, but I think most people in Broncos country will be like, hey, we are way ahead of schedule. We weren't expecting to be in the playoffs this year. We got an extra game. It's like going to a bowl game, right? It's a few extra practices. You got some experience. You got some playoff experience. They'll be better prepared next year when they get there because of it, right? They'll look at it as the trajectory's going up and not really worried about the end result. Conversely, Buffalo, they're Super Bowl or bust this year.
Oh, totally. Sean McDermott, you and I discussed it on Monday. He might get fired if they don't win this game. In fact, he probably will get fired if they don't win this game. And I'm trying to think the last time the Broncos played a house money playoff game, and I think it's got to be the Tebow year once they went to New England, because you had the miracle against Pittsburgh. This is the end of the 2011 season, January of 2012. But no one expected him to go beat Tom Brady in Foxborough. I think that's the last time they had a house money game in the postseason. We're talking 13 years ago since Broncos country has felt this way, been in this situation. Now, I get it. People thought Tim had magical powers, and maybe he does, and they expected him to pull the upset. But no realistic fan thought, oh, yeah, we're going to go win in New England. It sort of has a similar feeling to this game.
Well, and I think prior to that, probably the only other house money playoff game they had was 1983, John Elway's rookie year.
Yeah.
So nobody expected him to get in there. They didn't figure they would make the Super Bowl. The next year in 1984, when John was the full-time starter, he wasn't splitting games and kind of rotating here and there with Steve DeBerg. They went 13-3. People expected him to go to the Super Bowl. Now they lost their first playoff game at home to Bubby Brister and the Pittsburgh Steelers.
That's a trivia question.
But 1983, 2012, and this year, kind of the only times that I can think of where they were playing with house money.
That's crazy. 3 times in the history of the franchise, they've had a house money playoff game.
And I think, I want to say, and I don't have it in front of me, I want to say the 83 game was up in Seattle.
Okay.
So you're on the road, you're at Seattle. People are looking at that saying, well, again, if they get a win, great. If not, what a great rookie year for the franchise quarterback. You're right. The Tebow game here against Pittsburgh, I think people were excited about it thinking, hey, they got a shot. Then they pull off the miracle that was 12 years ago today. 13 years ago today. 13 years ago today.
Yeah, it was in 2012. It was my senior year of college.
13 years ago today. And then this one, where if you lose the game, people will be disappointed. It's a playoff game. That's always disappointing. But they're not going to be mad.
No.
And that's the difference. That's where it's house money. Nobody's calling for – they could lose 47-3, and nobody's calling for anybody's head.
Nope.
How often does that situation arise in a playoff game?
Very rarely. Very rarely. It would have happened last week. Someone's head may have had to roll if they'd lost to the JV Chiefs, but now that they're in it, it is a chunk of gravy for this Broncos team. I do wonder, too, and we'll hear from Cortland and Bo and Sean as the show goes on, but there was a clear message today, James, that we're not just here to have fun. We're here to win. And I think that has to come from Sean, because I think the players – they don't know what to say before playoff games. I was doing some research today for my story at denversports.com. You know how many playoff games Sean Payton's coached in?
Boy, I'm going to try and do some quick math here without having to listen. I'm going to say 17.
Ding, ding, ding.
Was that what it was?
Yeah, did you read my story?
I have not yet.
And do you know what his record is in those playoff games?
9-8.
Ding, ding, ding. I think you read it. In all seriousness, though, 9-8 in the playoffs is really damn good. Anything above 500 in playoff football is like an elite record. I think the players are taking the cue from the head coach. He's the only one who knows anything about the playoffs. Who on this team has played in a playoff game? Not a single guy from Super Bowl 50 is still here. So it means they did it with another team. I think Mike McGlinchey probably played in playoff games with the Niners.
I would guess so. Did Ben Powers play in a playoff game with the Ravens?
Probably. Zach Allen, I doubt he played in any playoff games with Arizona.
Was he on that team when they lost to the Rams the year the Rams won the Super Bowl? When Kyler Murray didn't want to go in at the end of the game? Maybe.
Could have been.
Maybe. But it was one game. I mean, it's not a ton of experience. We'll put it that way.
And they have 53 guys on this team. Maybe 5 have played in the postseason before.
Has Will Lutz kicked in the postseason?
Probably, because New Orleans made it most years. But he certainly, I don't think there's a guy on this roster with a ring. I'd be shocked if there's a guy on this roster with a ring.
I don't think so.
So I think they're taking their cue from their head coach of that message is we're not here to just have fun, we're here to win. But none of them can really know that from experience other than Sean, who's been in this situation 17 times and won 9 of them.
Well, I think the lack of experience can go one of two extremes. It either is you are just not prepared for it because playoffs in any sport, it ramps up.
You get punched in the face.
Yeah. Like the intensity in NBA playoffs is different than it is in Game 82. Major League Baseball playoffs are different, right? Stanley Cup playoffs may be the biggest difference.
The
All
intensity.
Of a sudden, the intensity is off the charts. And you go down to about half the games at Ball Arena, it's just a bunch of guys skating around, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of how it feels.
Depends on the opponent. But yes, if it's Columbus here on a Tuesday night, that's generally going to be the vibe.
I always say it's like sitting in front of a dryer at a laundromat and you're just watching maroon and white jerseys go in circles. That's what you're watching.
You're going to piss off hockey guy, but do your thing.
That's what a lot of hockey games are like. It's a jump up in the NFL playoffs. So their lack of experience could bite them because they may not be ready for that. That's the first quarter buzzsaw that they have to avoid. But there's also the naivete can be a good thing, right? Like, you don't know any better. You don't know that you're not supposed to be able to roll in there as a nearly double-digit underdog and beat the Bills. You don't know that they're supposed to be going to the Super Bowl. You're just like, yeah, we've been winning games. We've been beating teams. We're going to go in there. We'll win it. No problem.
Right.
But there's a bunch of guys that were on this team that went in there last year and won. So they may not know what it takes to win in the playoffs, but they know what it takes to win in Buffalo. So I have a feeling with this team, it's going to be the extreme of we don't know any better, and it's going to kind of play to their advantage. But that's another thing that we'll know in the first 45 minutes of real time.
Yeah, by about 11:45 Mountain
Correct.
Time on Sunday. And it is, I think, kind of to your point there's a reason Sean Payton has said young and hungry. He used it on Sunday. He used it on Monday. And then some folks did some research. He was using that in July. Like, we should print young and hungry on a T-shirt. That kind of feels like the motto of the 2024 Broncos is young and hungry. And young and hungry is just wacky enough to go upset the Bills, get their coach fired, send another fan base into despair in a season that came up way short for a city that's never won a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Like, you do have on your side that Buffalo's knowing to choke. This would be a very Bills-type game to lose.
Well, and that's why I think after the first quarter, the Bills could get very tight. The building could get very tight. We talked about it with the Broncos game this past Sunday.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't think it would be the laugher that it was because we didn't know Andy Reid wasn't going to try.
He's just going to tank it.
But at the end of the first quarter, if the Broncos had been down and it was like, oh, my God, we're going to blow this lead, we're going to lose our last 3 games and miss the playoffs, they would have gotten tight. That same thing could apply in Buffalo. If the Broncos get a couple of breaks early, get a lead, all of a sudden they start thinking, oh, my God, here we go again in the Josh Allen window, and we're burning another year of his prime. And all of those thoughts that I guarantee you people talked about all last offseason on Buffalo Sports Talk Radio.
Oh, sure.
Right? And now all of a sudden they're going to start coming up again in everybody's minds. Sean McDermott's going to start thinking about his job and all the rest of that stuff. So the first quarter, avoid the buzzsaw. Man, if you can jump on them and get out to a lead, you give yourself a great chance to pull the upset.
And it was kind of like year 4 of Peyton Manning here. We talked about that earlier in the show, the 5 touchdowns they had. But I don't know I had much fun because I knew it was ring or bust. I knew it was probably it for the sheriff, and I knew the era would be remembered on based whether or not he got a Lombardi trophy. I don't think Bills fans are going to have a lot of fun watching this game. They're going to be nervous about this football game, whereas the Broncos, heck yeah, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to kick my feet up and see if they can shock the world.
You know what it feels a lot like is 1996 when the Jaguars came in here to play the Broncos. Nobody gave the 9-7 Jags much of a chance. They were in their 3rd year of existence, but it was Elway in his 14th year.
The clock was ticking for John to get a ring.
Running out of time. The Broncos were 12-1 that year by December 1st and had already clinched. They basically took the last month of the season off, and as soon I was in the building, as soon as that game started going a little bit Jacksonville's way, and I was like, uh-oh, this could be trouble. It got really tight and really tense, and you could just feel it slipping away.